Well, you can say Carol's gonna introduce it. Penelope. Yeah. And I know Alvaro. What is your name, please? Gabriel. Thank you.
Okay, we have to start. Muy buenos días a todos y todas quienes estén presentes en este auditorio hoy. Pues la verdad es que soy muy buenos días. Muy buenos días. ¿Se escucha? Sí. ¿Sí? Bueno, todos quienes están aquí presentes en el auditorio del Instituto de Investigaciones Sociales. Estoy muy contento por este día, por tener finalmente aquí a la doctora Kline, una amiga de ya varios años que trabaja en los temas de turismo y desarrollo rural, de turismo y animales, y que ya está presente en la Appalachian State University. Acordamos que Carol se va a presentar en inglés y yo traduciré en español lo que ella diga y después le daré la palabra. Carol, buenos días. Good morning.
Good morning and thank you. Thank you all for being here. The volume's okay? Okay, wonderful. As Jafet said, I am from, my name is Carol Kline, and I'm from Appalachian State University. It is the fourth university that I've worked in North Carolina. Some people think I can't hold a job because I keep moving around, but I'm very happy at Appalachian State University. We're in the beautiful mountains of North Carolina, and part of my presentation will talk a little bit about that area. But I was born in North Carolina, and I've really made a career about rural tourism and sustainable tourism. And so I was taught when I was in my 20s that going into a rural area, because I'm from a city, I was taught to listen and not, think that I have all the ideas coming from a city, that I'm so smart. And so when I think about working in rural areas, I think about the efforts being very community driven. And I'll stop there so that Jafet can catch up.
That's right. Bueno, pues es la doctora Carol Kline de la Universidad Appalachian State, y comenta que es la cuarta universidad en la que he estado. En esta cuarta, la que la gente piensa que pues no puede mantener un trabajo fijo porque lleva 4 trabajos en universidades diferentes. Y bueno, ha trabajado principalmente el tema del desarrollo rural y el turismo y la sostenibilidad desde una perspectiva de una persona urbana, básicamente, ¿no? Entonces, que el desarrollo, la presencia del campo, pues le ha hecho tener una visión diferente, a pesar de ser una persona de la ciudad.
And I feel very fortunate because there was no job like this before I started working early in my 20s at my university. And I was able to go out to rural areas, and I worked with farmers and artists and park directors and all downtown developers and elected officials, and I learned how to. Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Sorry. What was my point? And so I was working with all types of people in rural areas. And so I'll stop there, and then I have one more piece of introduction before I actually start the presentation.
Bueno, que cuando estaba en sus 20s, ella empezó a trabajar principalmente con granjeros, con gente del campo, con un montón de gente y que se dio cuenta de diferentes perspectivas justamente de lo que estaba trabajando y que nunca se había dado cuenta que había un trabajo exactamente establecido o un trabajo que generara, bueno, un trabajo enfocado en lo que ella quería desarrollar en términos rurales.
Yeah, and so my research reflected that. It would always be a sustainable type of rural tourism. It would always be community driven. It would always be more positive impacts of tourism on the community than negative. And so my research was about entrepreneurs in rural areas. My research has been about different niches, different niche markets. For example, I worked with African American heritage, where I'm from, and lots of different niches and things that fall under the area of sustainability. When I got older, I saw the age of 50 coming at me, and I thought, I have not done the thing that I love the most. I have not focused on the thing that I love the most, and that's non-human animals. And so when I saw 50 coming at me, I thought, wow, that went fast. I need to not let another 50 years go by without embracing what I love. And so I started teaching myself and coming to conferences in Mexico City and hanging out with people like Jafet and Alvaro and learning from them. And that's and I pivoted my research. So now the type of research I do is animal welfare and animal ethics in tourism.
That's a lot to say. Bueno, comenta que cuando empezaba a hacer sus investigaciones se enfocó principalmente en temas de turismo sustentable, en prácticas que estuvieran asociadas con proyectos principalmente donde la población local fuera quien manejara este tipo de proyectos, ¿no? Y esos nichos de mercado asociados con este tipo de desarrollo rural. También que ha trabajado con cuestiones de patrimonio en personas africanas americanas, ¿no? Todo enfocado a la cuestión de la sustentabilidad, o sea que fue lo que trabajó durante mucho tiempo y que mientras iba llegando a sus 50, ella se dio cuenta que no había enfocado su trabajo principalmente en lo que más le gustaba, que era la cuestión de los animales no humanos, que en ese momento se dio cuenta que no podía dejar pasar 50 años más para hacer investigación al respecto, entonces tomó el tema y que a partir de ese momento pues ha estado en conferencias, que vino aquí a la Ciudad de México a una conferencia, esto no lo dijo, pero Minding Animals, que fue donde nos conoció al doctor Álvaro y a mí, y a partir de ese momento pues investigaciones se han enfocado en cuestiones de bienestar animal principalmente y turismo.
Thank you for allowing us to do the introduction that way.
No, that's right. Thank you.
I hope that felt a little more personal than reading a bio.
That's right.
Okay, so here we go. We're going to be talking about rural tourism. And as I just alluded to, there are many types of rural tourism that can be created and developed. The slide shows really broad general categories. And within these categories, there can be smaller forms of it. It just depends upon what an area has in terms of its assets. Just curious, the folks who are here, have you, or the folks who are on, joining virtually, have you done work in rural tourism or studied rural tourism? Ish. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna love this. That's cool. Okay. Great. So again, these are our broad categories. On the left-hand side of the slide. On the right-hand side of the slide is another way to think about it in terms of if you're going into an area, the whole point of tourism is to bring outside money into an area. If you're not doing that, then why do we want to have strangers come into our homes and impact our environment and potentially dilute the culture and these potential negative impacts that can happen with tourism and do happen? Why would we want that if there weren't some positives involved as well? And money is not the only positive, but it is a positive that can help families, it can help individuals, it can help business owners, and it can help, it can be funneled back into preserving natural resources, programs that preserve natural resources. And then, as I mentioned before, really the type of tourism that we're talking about, no matter what the niche or the angle or the asset is we want tourism that maximizes the positive impacts for a community and minimizes the negative. It's never going to be perfect, but we want to try to get as much good out of it for the community as possible. We're doing questions at the end, right? Yeah. Okay, great. And some of those positives are listed here on the slide. These are mostly the ones that you lead with when you go into a community and you're talking with the decision makers and the officials, the official leaders, because we all know there's some unofficial leaders in a community. But these are the reasons why that you lead with, or that you're actually invited into a community in the first place, because tourism can provide jobs. It can provide wealth from outside the area. It can grow the inherent talent in an area and bring forth entrepreneurs where they might not have had the confidence or the skills to engage with tourists before that. And there are a lot of sociocultural and environmental impacts, both good and bad, that we'll talk about later in the presentation. So what I'm going to do is pretty quickly talk about 4 cases from different parts of the world. And, honestly, I could take one of these cases and just go really deep and spend an hour doing that. Don't worry, I won't. I'm going to go very quickly, too quickly. But I hope to tie it all together in the end, tell you enough about the projects. And then I want to talk about the commonalities across these projects, because I think that's the important principles of doing rural tourism development. I would like to briefly introduce something that is close to my heart called the Community Capitals Framework. And as you think about communities, whether it's in a tourism sense or geography sense, or however you think about communities, I think strongly that you will like this framework. You will be able, this will resonate with you, and you'll remember this. You'll take it with you. And then later, we can skip the last one. The Uplift project is a 3-year rural tourism project that I'm doing right now. We're just starting it. We've received funding from the federal government it was actually COVID relief money for the tourism industry. Unheard of, absolutely unheard of. But we have this project ramping up. I don't think we'll have time for it, but maybe afterwards if you want. So let's go to Uganda. In the southwest part of Uganda, if you look at the map of Africa, you can see where exactly we're talking about. There is something called the Albertine Rift, and as geographers, you know what a rift is. Okay, great. And the Albertine Rift is one of the most biodiversity richest areas on the continent of Africa. The number of species. So I'm always going to kind of take it back to animals. Yeah, I'm going to try to sneak animals in there. Non-human animals. The biodiversity there is just off the charts. And the information about this particular project came from a colleague of mine who did tourism development all over the world. He worked for a company called Solimar International. He's now with Naturescapes, but he engages at the international level with organizations like USAID, Conservation International, Wildlife Conservation Society, African Wildlife Foundation. If those names don't resonate with you, they're the really, really big NGOs that do both economic development work, but also conservation work around the world. And so the goals of these projects, the goals of this particular project, and they came up with a great acronym, right? STAR. You always have to have a great acronym. Sustainable Tourism of the Albertine Region, STAR. I mean, a project is nothing unless it has a good acronym. And so they really wanted to do all of the good things that tourism can do: bring in revenue, provide training and assistance support for entrepreneurs, so that they, even beyond the tourism realm, they have the skills and the capacity to have their own business. So it's developing that human capital. um, Putting into place feelings of confidence and self-reliance. I mean, these are really intangible things that tourism can do if it's done well, if it's planned well. And so they had 4 different strategies. The destination development and marketing strategy happening sort of at this level. Partnerships. Things can't happen in rural tourism without partnerships. Pretty much things can't happen in life without partnerships. But over the last 30 years, as I've worked in rural tourism, I know that the most successful projects that we've seen are the folks working across borders, artificial borders, working across natural borders, and working across institutions, even institutions that aren't supposed to get along, or they're supposed to be competition. The ability to partner and reach out and engage with other people, that's really a key to not just success in rural tourism, but success in general. The third strategy was all about entrepreneurship development, and I don't want to say giving, supporting the skills, finding out what skills people had, and then supplementing those skills so that they could create their own enterprises. And then making sure that the local government knew when and how to engage, and also when not to engage, but being a support mechanism. And again, this is happening at the local level, outside of parks, of national parks. It's happening at like a province or state level, and at an national level, because there were some players. There were some players here, like the Uganda Community Tourism Association, so national levels, and then you have these international funders and partners to come in. Before I go further to Norway, before we jump over to Norway, I will say that there were a lot of benefits that came out of this, because the name of my talk is The Ups and Downs of Rural Tourism. So I need to cover the ups and the downs very briefly. There were a lot of collaborative marketing strategies. There were a lot of collaborative planning activities. Because this is intuitive. You don't want someone coming in from the outside and telling you how to do things in your area. That's the absolute wrong way to do rural tourism development. And so there was a lot of collaboration. There was a lot of marketing strategies, even like building in tour operators coming to the area as you're creating itineraries and as you're creating basic products. The tour operators are getting that buy-in from the beginning, and they're saying, "Hey, I could sell that. I love this idea of what you're doing over here." That didn't happen enough, though. My partner Simon on this project, I wasn't on this project. He's my partner now on Uplift. Anyway, Simon said that that didn't happen enough in the beginning, and that was one of the challenges of the project. That was one of the downs of the project. Also, there was a natural attrition from these training programs. 40 people signed up and said they wanted to host people in their own homes. But then by the end, only 30 people were actually doing that. And then after that, only 20 people were actually doing it well. And so that needing to engage continually with the visitor and that hosting mentality, that happen as much as the project leaders would have liked, the local leaders and the international leaders. So those are some downs, but overall, very successful marketing campaign, an uptick in tourism. And the chart here in blue, those are all the indicators on one part of those strategies. They had these indicators, these metrics for measuring their success for each of those 4 strategies that I had outlined before. This is just one of them. Probably this one's for the entrepreneurship strategy. Okay, now we're going to go to Norway. It's going to be a little bit colder there. So, I love maps. I'm not officially a geographer, but I have always loved maps. And it drives me crazy when people talk about a place, but they don't provide context. So I might overdo that. You recognize Scandinavia in one of the maps here, and in the larger map, see where that red dot is? That is the Saltstraumen Strait. Okay, it's a little thin body of water that dumps into that larger. I'm close enough, I can point. It dumps into this larger fjord. And so here's the Atlantic Ocean over here. And what's so special about that little strait is the force of the tide, the strength of the tide is like nowhere else on Earth. And I decided not to talk about like knots and speed, and it's just really, really strong. It's really strong. And maelstrom is a word used to describe the strength of these waters. And so what happens is a lot of different types of fish. I mean, very, very biodiverse aquatic environment up there in the Atlantic, because you don't have a lot of people messing it up. And so it's very biodiverse. And all these fish dump into this fjord. Very cool. And divers and anglers, fisher people, come here to see the fish and catch the fish and have different types of experiences with the fish. Sometimes they have an experience with the fish like this underwater, and then sometimes they have an experience with the fish eating the fish. And also the recreation of catching the fish, but big diving area. And the area overall is a marine protected area. It is a marine protected park. And that's significant to this story because there's some bad things happening here. This cute little guy, isn't he cute? He is a wolffish. And there are wolffish all over the world. There are wolffishes in South America. This wolffish, and the characteristics are the same. This wolffish lives a lot in very, very dark places. And its movements are dictated by the cycles of the moon. What's cool about the wolffish is once the male and female wolffish mate, they both hang out for a little bit in their nest. That's not what you call it, but in their nest, in their cave. But then the female is like, okay, thanks, bye, have fun. And so the male just protects the eggs, like this. And they're very, I'm not going to say friendly fish, but they don't mind humans. They don't scare. And especially if you're protecting your eggs, your young, you're going to stay there. And the divers in this particular area, sorry, thought the map was there. Just imagine the map is there. The divers in this particular area have gotten to know specific wolffish. And they know them, and they recognize them. And maybe the wolffish recognize the divers as well. Who's to say? And so lots of photography is done, lots of filming is done. Also, tourists are coming into the area now to see this guy because he's so interesting looking. I'm not going to say ugly. He's so interesting looking. He's almost charismatic. Yeah. And I have a soft spot for the non-charismatic animals, really. Um, and so divers are coming in, tourists are coming in, and fishermen are coming in. And what's happening is there is a lot of pollution being left underwater with the nets and the lines. I guess the bait's not that really big of a deal. But anytime you even have divers, there's going to be human impact felt. And so that lovely fjord is really starting to get trashed, and animals are dying, birds are dying, all kinds of aquatic life is dying, and it's just kind of a bad situation. And so many people are isn't that beautiful? Like many people are calling for a ban of fishing, a ban of diving. And when I say many people, national political parties in Norway are calling for a ban. Certainly local folks are calling for a ban, but even the diving tour operators that recognize this is their livelihood, they're calling for a ban. Now it's already a marine protected area, but it's interesting. So I'm doing research in this area with a colleague in Norway, and then a colleague in Colorado in the U.S. And so we are studying the wolffish and the perceptions of the wolffish from a post-humanistic perspective. And I lost my point there. Yeah, I lost my point. But it is absolutely one of the downs of tourism, because now new money is coming into the area and has been. Oh, I know what my point was. We're interviewing stakeholders in this area, different lots of those people I just mentioned, and over and over again, this marine protected area is referred to as a paper park. So it's a park on paper, it's protected on paper, but not really. So that's why these extra, it's a marine protected area, but it doesn't seem very protected. And so there's this ban being called. Okay, we're going to leave Norway. We're going to come a little bit closer to home. Okay, we're going to go to Guatemala. Now, I don't think you need maps of where Guatemala is. But since I'm American and I don't know where anything is in the world, right? I did want to just put perspective on where in Guatemala we're talking about. And so we're in I pronounce it Pitan. Okay, we're in the Pitan area, and we're going to a wildlife sanctuary. And the name of the wildlife sanctuary is ARCUS, and that is an acronym in Spanish that basically is a protection area and rescue area for wildlife. Okay, so when I say ARCUS, that's what I'm talking about. And as you see from the slide, it was formed by citizens. And this is going to be a theme, like how rural tourism efforts are initiated, right? In Uganda, they were initiated from like this, but also like this. You understand what I mean? Like from the ground up, but also from the outside in. ARCUS completely from the ground up. And they do all kinds of wonderful activities. I went to ARCUS this summer in June, and I was fortunate to be able to volunteer there and wore a mask in the jungle, cleaning macaw poop. It was amazing, right? And cutting up bananas for whoever eats bananas down there. I can't remember. But I guess macaws and toucans would eat bananas and different fruits. It was a wonderful experience, and I highly, highly recommend it. If you ever want to learn more about wildlife trafficking, like in the situation where it's happening, because most of these animals were confiscated at the border or at the airport because they were going to be sold as pets, or as a bird that's going to sit in a hotel or something like that. But they have all kinds of animals. And then later they built, with some funding from external funding and internal funding, they were able to build a very nice environmental education center. So you can think of it as a visitor center too, because tourists come and they learn about wildlife trafficking and poaching. And it's very well done. Okay, we're going to go on to, they are, I will say, they are accredited by the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries, which is a thing. It is a governing body that will say this is a good sanctuary. They have really good practices, and you have to pay to become a member, but it's not much. Now, that doesn't mean that non-members are all bad, but it does give you a barometer of if you're going to go to an animal sanctuary somewhere, just check the list and see if they're on there. Also, just check websites, because if a sanctuary is doing good things and has ethical practices, they're gonna brag about it. They're gonna tell you about it. So that's just a real sidebar in terms of if you are traveling and you want to go see animals and you decide to go to an animal sanctuary or some sort of animal attraction, check the website. If they're telling you good things, that's a good sign. If there's nothing on there, maybe pass on that one. So, goodness. Again, many animals. I also encourage you to check out their website, because there's so much more information there. But the closest town to Arcus is Flores. And do you know Flores? Some of you nodded like you've heard of Flores.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Pablo, you've heard of Flores? No. Okay. Okay. Well, so Arcus being there has provided tourism-based benefits to Flores and to the region. First of all, employment. There are wildlife technicians. There are veterinary technicians. There are folks that cook food for the staff and for volunteers who come and work. Volunteers like me who came and worked in June. There are people who work in transportation, and there are a lot of biologists and ecologists who work there, and veterinarians. So it's a big operation, and they actually have an office in Hawaii. They're doing work in Hawaii as well. Anyway, so just jobs and revenue. Now, anytime you have a place where you've got animals and people, you're going to need food, you're going to need supplies, you're going to need sheets, you're going to need digging, gardening equipment. And so just down the supply chain, all of the things that are purchased to keep Arcus running, that's a benefit. That's a really big economic benefit to the town of Flores. The other big attraction, as you probably know, is Tikal National Park. And so when people come to that area of Guatemala and Petén, they go to Tikal. Like, usually that would be what they do. Now that Arcus is there and established, people stay longer in the region. And in tourism, that's the name of the game. You want people to stay longer so that they spend more money on good things. And so now they're going to Tikal, but then they're saying, well, what about this wildlife thing I've heard about? Let's go over, let's cross the water and go visit the education center. And then they get emotionally involved, and they leave a donation for the center, which is wonderful, of course. Now, I know about Arcus, and I went to Arcus through a company called Animal Experiences International. And if you don't take away anything else from this talk, Animal Experiences International. This is an international tour operator. They're based in Canada. It's run by two women. And one's a veterinarian and one is a social scientist. And they arrange tours for volunteers to go all over the world and help animals. Like, that's the best combo of animal and tourism that you can get. And And so the image there on the bottom left is from their website. And so they bring lots and lots of people into Arcus to volunteer. And now being who I am and knowing nothing about wildlife or veterinary care or anything like that, I was like, am I really helping? I mean, come on. I'm like doing this. I know the donation and the financial part is nice, but am I really helping? And I'm like pulling weeds and like taking my machete and, cutting down things and lots of cleaning. I'm like doing some really good like cleaning. And yeah, that's like, yeah. Okay. And so, but the answer is yes, because if you don't have volunteers doing that really, basic work, then that means the staff has to do it. And so we free up the staff to then do higher order, more skilled labor, like surgeries. and so the volunteer tourism is a really nice kind of lifeblood for Arcus. And then again, they have this very nice educational component where they teach Guatemalans, local Guatemalans, visiting Guatemalans, and then visiting international folks about the tourism about wildlife and poaching. Okay, we're going to go to my home state. We're going to go to Appalachia. Now, the term Appalachian, you all are geographers, refers to the Appalachian Mountains, which crosses several states. And so as it happens in North Carolina, it's in the western part of North Carolina, whereas the eastern part of North Carolina is the coast. So I may refer back to like western North Carolina. And here's a map. I'm over explaining, I know, but that's about where North Carolina is. And you can see from the topography map, the topo map, that it's mountainous there. And as geographers, that culture and society springs from the topography. If you live on the coast, you're going to have coastal livelihoods. You're going to have coastal jobs. And you're going to have coastal culture. If you're in the mountains and you have these big ridges dividing communities, well, that's going to shape you as a person. And you're not going to be fishing the same way you would be fishing, on the coast. You're not going to have the same soil to make pots and craft as you would on the coast. You might have reeds and you might do things that way. So this, but I think for me, when I realized or when I was taught that where you grow up geographically shapes your livelihoods and who you are in the culture, and that those two things, you cannot pull those apart, that was just very revealing for me. So in this area, Appalachian region in general has historically been poor, very, very poor. But then as society progressed and more and more people accumulated wealth, people who had wealth would come to the mountains and they would say, man, this is beautiful. I want a home here. I'm going to move here, or if they're very wealthy, I'm going to have a second home here. And so you had a lot of outsiders coming in. And when you have outsiders coming in, there's some tension and there's some resentment because the outsiders have more money than the people who are there. And they're starting to like throw their weight around and make decisions when they're not really from there. So that was happening in the 1990s. And then there were a lot of extractive industries coming in, mining for coal and, taking things out of the earth. And then there were just, it was cheap land at that time. And it's not now, but it was cheap land at that time. And companies would come in and just build a big factory of whatever, building cars or something. And that just seemed like dirty industries. But the people who lived there didn't have the power to do anything about it. Okay, I'm setting the scene. Okay, so in comes a group of people. The leader, I will say, her name was Becky Anderson, and Becky was from the region. Okay, important. And Becky with the help of many other people, kind of said, all right, we need to figure out how to kind of take back control of our destiny, of our region. And so they talked about it and talked about what's really unique here. And they came up with the arts, with it was the culture. And so they focused on craft. They focused on handicraft. And flash forward, Western North Carolina is probably one of the top 3 big craft areas that you go to visit in the United States if you want to see fine handicraft. And so they did 2 things. One, they commissioned my university, I wasn't there at the time, but my university, to do an economic impact of the craft industry across the region. Well, the numbers were in the millions, and that was amazing to a lot of people. People knew there were a lot of crafters, but they didn't realize the direct and indirect economic impact were in the millions. And then they also started going around from town to town saying, tourists like to buy these $50, $100, $500 things. I bet tourists would like to come see the artist where the artist is being inspired. So rather than taking their goods and their art and going down to Charlotte, to going from the country to Mexico City to sell, they're bringing the tourists out to where they're creating. And they did that through an old-fashioned guidebook. Okay. And these guidebooks, there's a picture of them there. These guidebooks were made to fit into the glove compartment of a car. Now, I know this sounds super ancient, and it kind of is, but this case study lives on. It lives on. And so I was fortunate enough to work for Handmade in America. That was the group that was spearheading this. That was Becky's organization. For 2 years, I was their director of tourism. Now, I came in on it very late in the cycle. But these guidebooks, along with this craft, this economic impact of craft, took the craft industry and just went like this. And so these economic developers and these business people who were going, artists, whatever, that's so silly, isn't that cute? All of a sudden, we're paying attention to the power. It gave them political voice, and that's a big deal. All of a sudden, artists were on sitting at the table making decisions about their community, which was the whole goal. So the first guidebook was published, and not every town, not every artist, and it was literally like drive here, drive here, drive here, drive here. I mean, it was a guidebook. Go to this gallery, go to this studio. But not every town made the book. And that was a really important lesson, because you wouldn't make the book if your town wasn't visitor ready, right? If you didn't have parking, if you didn't have a public bathroom, if it kind of looked, if it looked. And so Becky started getting calls from these different towns saying, well, why isn't Saluda in the book? Well, why isn't, Bryson City in the book? Why did you leave me out? So by leaving them out of the book, it inspired these towns to become better. And so the Small Towns program was born from Handmade in America. I do not have time to tell you about the Small Towns program, but it was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. And again, it was a partnership. Local community members, local volunteers, and one paid person working with Handmade to write grants and to provide support to whatever the town wanted to do, right? The town had to outline their priorities, and then grants would come and the town would be developed. Okay, so I think that's probably enough about Handmade in America. And but I think that gives you a taste of how powerful this organization was. The artists in the area today, some of them don't even know about this heritage. They don't know that Handmade set the stage for them and made Western North Carolina the place that it is. And that's interesting as well. Okay, so that was a lovely trip around the world. Hope you're not jet lagged because we got a little bit more talking to do. I'm going to just talk very briefly about commonalities. And I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I'm going to wrap up here. I'm going to try to wrap up in like 5-ish minutes. Partnerships. I tried to do a good job, but I probably fell short of naming all the people who are involved in these partnerships. I mean, in these programs, multi-level, wide and rural tourism cannot be done without so many partnerships. You need all the stakeholders present, the people who stand to benefit, and especially the people who are like have something to lose. They all have to be present. And in each of these cases, they were. There is an emphasis on these things being community driven and from the ground up and grassroots. They're not going to be 100% pure, grassroots, but if the majority of it can be, even if it's not started that way, even if it can become that way, then that provides success. That's a good avenue towards success. There also, in my opinion, from the observations, there needs to be an emphasis on building capacity. And capacity building is such an awkward phrase. The general public don't really know what it means, but in our business, we use it all the time. Capacity building is building human capacity. It's building skills, confidence, that feeling of like, I can do it, that self-reliance. One of my favorite words is efficacy. It builds self-efficacy. And then because that will provide that sense of local ownership beyond the project. Handmade in America set the stage for Western North Carolina. Some people don't even know they did, but there's still this pride of local ownership in Western North Carolina because of the work they've done. And then some more commonalities. Not as much about this on the slides, but it helps if you are aware of the positive impacts and the negative impacts, the ups and downs that could come with tourism development, and you start paying attention to those from the beginning, and not just planning for them, but monitoring them and measuring them and evaluating them. That's better from the beginning. Again, building in those connections with media and marketing from the beginning so that they feel like they're a stakeholder. That's very important. And all of this, going back to partnerships, all of this is built on trust. Again, life lesson, not just about rural tourism, but trust has that element of reciprocity, shared values, and transparency. Yeah, I knew there was another one, transparency. When I lost my train of thought a few minutes ago, I said, I've lost my train of thought. There's no reason for me to pretend like I didn't. And so I was being transparent with you. That allowed you to trust me a little bit more about what I'm saying. So at least I hope it did. That's the end of the case studies. And I just want to very briefly introduce this community capitals framework because it relates. Everything in a community can fall into one of these 7 community capitals. And what is brilliant in my mind about this model is that it is so simple and everyone in a community can get their head around it. And if you change one thing in a community, if you build capacity, then that is going to have a ripple effect. It's going to change another component. And then that change is going to change another component. One of the examples, really quickly, there was a boardwalk built along a creek. Just imagine a boardwalk being built along a creek. And people from the community start walking on this boardwalk. Well, they're getting healthier. They come down, they've got like a routine now. They're working out or running or walking, but they're also enjoying nature. So they're feeling calmer, more peaceful. They're also seeing each other and being more social. Okay. Also on this boardwalk, it becomes like a draw from outside areas of the county, and they come down and they love this boardwalk. Everybody's like digging on this boardwalk. And even the people who didn't want the boardwalk are now saying, yeah, I supported that boardwalk when the idea came up. A festival, an arts festival, is now set up once a year along this boardwalk. And people, artists can sell their wares along this boardwalk. Tourists come in and go to other parts of the town. See, so one change in built capital, building the boardwalk, has this ripple effect within a community. That's the power of this community's capital framework. Now, that process is a spiraling up process. And if you are working with a community, or a community wants to talk about something that they've done, or they're asking for money so that they can build a boardwalk, the community capitals framework is powerful, because in 60 seconds, you all saw what a boardwalk could do for a community. And so if whatever maybe it's installing sewer lines or Wi-Fi, whatever that slight intervention is, or having a program for young pregnant women, whatever the intervention is, it has a spiraling up effect. And you can tell your story so much with this. Okay, that's more spirals. Don't worry about that. Back to Handmade in America real fast. I did a retrospective study on all of their programs. And instead of it being a spiraling up, it looked like this. Okay. On the left, I interviewed 120, 130 people who worked with Handmade during the course of 2 decades. And I compiled all their answers. And this is what they said their interventions did. So the very top thing on the left is the economic impact of craft study. The top thing on the right here is the very first craft book. Those 2 things did this and this and this, and then that did this, and then that did this. Then I asked people to put it into the community capitals model. And I don't know if you can read this, but if you look at all of these crazy drawings, there was so much human capital gained. There was so much social capital gained. There was so much financial capital gained, and political capital. People who did not have a voice in the community felt like it was their community again, and they had control over their own life. So crazy drawings, I know, really wild, but this is how you can use the community capitals framework to tell a very complex story about a destination or a program. I really want to thank you and all of the supporters of the program. Thank you, Alvaro. Thank you for being here today, because it would be difficult for me to look at these, images in the chairs and not have. Thank you very much for your engagement and your attention. Also, I would like to thank Simon Jones and Nora Livingstone and my colleagues, Dr. Hen Heemstra and Christina Cavalier, who helped provide me with information about this story. And thank you to Arcus for doing such amazing work, and to Handmade in America. So, I am finally done.
Yeah, thank you, Carol.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that was a really nice presentation. I was thinking about the differences between Mexico and the rural tourism here, because it's nothing like this. For example, I was thinking about this small towns program that we have something similar as Pueblos Mágicos.
Yeah.
But it has been a failure of a program very much, because local people is not really involved. And I have a question about it. I think that the small towns program is focused, the difference between Mexico and the US experience, I think, is the purchasing power of tourists. Because, for example, you were saying that tourists go to the Appalachian region, and they can buy a handicraft made by locals in $50, $100, $200. Here, for example, this program is focused on domestic tourism.
Mm-hmm.
but domestic tourists don't have this purchasing power.
Sure.
So
Sure.
they create handcrafts, they travel, but we're talking like maybe people who travel to the magical towns spend less than 1,000 pesos a day.
Absolutely. I think I know where you're going. I don't think that matters. I was using those numbers just to get your attention. I mean, there's certainly crafts that are less than that. But I don't think the scale is what's important. The scale of the purchasing power is what's really the focus. It's all of the other things. It's the craftspeople feeling like they have a market, feeling like this is a viable livelihood to keep doing what they love to do. It's them as a collective feeling like they are moving the needle, to use a funny expression, that they're making a change in their town for the for the better. So if you go from $5 a month of income to $10 a month, that's an improvement. But it could be 50 to 100 as well. And so I'm not sure the scale matters for the point of this presentation, but yes, I'm glad you brought that up because there is a big difference.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, now I'm going to talk in Spanish a little bit. No sé si alguien tenga alguna pregunta para Carol Kline, algo quieran ustedes, no sé, profundizar algo. I'm asking them for questions.
Yes, preguntas, please.
Now that you were talking about flores, I was thinking, okay, a lot of animals arrive there in order to local people take care about other animals that were confiscados.
Confiscated.
In other places. So what happened with the native or endemic species that live there? Because the new animals that are right there, they will have a better life than if they were bringing to other places. But what happened with the biological relationships with the native species?
Sure. No, that's a wonderful question, and it shows me that I didn't do a very good job explaining. They are native species. The animals that are living there at the sanctuary are native to Guatemala, and the whole goal of coming to the sanctuary is so that then they can be released, and they are taken up to Tikal National Park, and then they're released back into the wild. And there are some really emotional videos you can watch of macaws, flying off. I'm like, but as far as I can think of the animals that I saw there and the animals that I've seen, they are all native to Guatemala. They are endemic, and some can't be released. They have a very strict way of caring for the animals with very strict rules. Like as a volunteer, I wasn't allowed to talk to the animals, or engage with them as, so that they learn that humans are good creatures. And then they graduate them up so they're more and more independent. So at first, maybe an animal couldn't. I'm really going off subject here, so I'll just stop. But yes, they are endemic species.
And I have another
Yes,
question.
please.
Now that you were talking about Norway,
Yes.
I think the tourism probably wasn't a good idea, no? Because as you told us, after tourism, the lake or the area, the water, now it's very polluted. So
it's getting bad.
Do local people think that probably is a good idea to stop tourism?
Yes. Well, I don't know if they want to stop. I mean, they do want to impose a ban on fishing. I'm not sure if they want to impose a ban on diving, but they do on fishing. And so some of those anglers are going to be local, and some are going to be tourists, and some are going to be local Norwegian tourists. So I don't think it's no more tourism. I think they just want it to not be a paper park. They're angry that there's supposed to be these protections in play, but they're not. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, the question is because, I don't know, I have the idea that in Mexico, tourism programs always encourage to promote tourism.
More and more and more. Mm-hmm.
Never they think about to stop tourism.
That's right.
So my question is in that way, is it possible to think that for Norway people to say no more tourism in this place?
Right.
Or always they are thinking that we have to promote tourism.
No, I think they are saying, let's slow down here and figure out what's going on. And so when I was talking about the commonalities, it's real. That's why it's really good from the beginning to be think about the worst case scenario. What are some possible bad things that can happen? Yes, we want the money. Yes, we want, the jobs, but at what cost? And to start monitoring those things as you go. And I think here in Norway, Norwegians are very, very smart people. But I think in this case, there must have been some oversight that they didn't maybe they didn't realize that tourism was going to happen so fast, and just the impact was so overwhelming.
¿Alguien más quisiera comentar algo? Puede ser la pregunta en español sin problema, ahorita la traducimos.
I will try to do it in English.
Okay, thank you, Penelope.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about magical towns also.
Yeah.
Especially the last case you showed was about North Carolina.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about exactly what was the difference between one and another from tourists.
Yeah.
I would like to ask you, if I understood properly, in North Carolina, the image that is sold is like I will do this part in Spanish.
Yeah.
La parte que se vende, por decirlo así, la parte que se da al turista es más o menos lo que es tal cual nuestra Carolina del Norte, ¿no? Y en el caso de los pueblos mágicos me parece que algo más auténtico, exactamente, y me parece que en el caso, por ejemplo, de México con los pueblos mágicos, quizás una de las diferencias más importantes es que se vende una imagen pseudo estandarizada de lo que es lo mexicano.
Una representación.
Performance. Where in Mexico or okay?
Yeah, the image sold to tourists in North Carolina is the authenticity of North Carolina. While here in Mexico, what it's sold is like this construction of what is Mexicanity in the rural areas.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Maybe because in the very very origin of this program, it was thinking for the international tourists to see what Mexican is. Yeah. And I think in North Carolina it's like more authenticity about what North Carolina is for local tourism.
I think so. I agree with you. There is a Native American Indian reservation, a pretty famous one, Cherokee, in North Carolina, in this area, in Western North Carolina. And when I was growing up, right, many decades ago, you would go visit Cherokee, and there would be, you would drive into Cherokee as a tourist, and you would see an Indian with a big headdress, right, and feathers, and kind of like from the old Western, movies. And they'd have a tomahawk, and he would be like, waving his tomahawk, and there are big teepees, everywhere. Well, the Cherokee didn't wear headdresses. They don't use tomahawks, and they didn't live in teepees. And so that's what it reminded me of. And so now, like that was 40, 50 years ago. Now they are doing more authentic heritage. So maybe maybe, in time it can evolve, it can shift. Yeah. But I think the people who live in the magic towns would have to say, come on, let's do this a little more authentically.
And it's funny what you were saying about this authenticity, because sometimes this shift that is giving them like another kind of identity,
yes,
has been imposed from the outside.
Exactly.
It's not exactly from the inside. We were telling yesterday when we picked you up from the airport about this town we have in Mexico, Paracho. They usually sell guitars, and now these guitars are designed with a cocoa film, for example. Right. So it's like this is, or for example,
I'm totally gonna get one. No, I'm not.
Or for example, introducing some species into the places because they are giving them another kind of identity.
Right.
There are 132 magic towns in Mexico. There are a lot.
Wow.
Last time we were actually named in 2020.
Yeah.
So you have 132 semi-rural areas that are trying to compete against each other.
They shouldn't compete.
They are competing.
They should work together.
I think there's only one case in whole Mexico where they're working together.
Interesting.
It's not all of them, yeah. But they're competing. They are trying to get more and more and more tourists. So they need to find like this local brand.
Yeah.
To be in the imaginary or in the imagination of the tourist coming there.
So may I comment
on
that? So I feel like in rural areas, wherever we're talking about, some of the residents don't have a lot of self-confidence about where they live, about what they do. I mean, maybe they do. Maybe they have a lot of community pride. But people leave rural areas to go work in the cities. And people think badly, at least in the United States, about those poor, not so smart rural people. Like there's a stigma. And sometimes the rural people themselves start believing that stigma about themselves. That's what I'm thinking. That's where I'm going with this. So maybe there's not the confidence, the self-confidence to sort of stand up and say, that's not who we are, but who we are is even better. Who we are is actually better than this amplified version of ourselves. That's my first comment. Okay. Like, why isn't that happening? Maybe it's a self-confidence issue. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe because this program was imposed by the government.
Yeah. Well, I'm a psychology major, so I'm always going to think that it's going to come back to psychology. But yes, so maybe it's we need to do this. Mm-hmm. About the competition. So Handmade addressed this as well. Handmade addressed the competition because that's also a very human psychological thing. And so Handmade would bring together the small towns once a year and have what they called a cluster meeting. And during the cluster meeting, each town got to brag about their successes from the year. So it was a little bit of that like confident, like competing, but it was more communal. And because as I tell about my success, I'm going to have to tell you about like problems I had to overcome that and how I figured stuff out, how I worked out a problem, how our community worked out a problem. And so then your community hearing that, you're like, yeah, we did too. And we start trading ideas. And so I hate to hear that there is that competition, but I'm glad there are models out there on how to turn that competition into collaboration and learning from one another. It's peer mentoring, I think is the term. Learning from your peers.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't think that this program has been reviewed with this perspective.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. I don't know. ¿Alguien más?
Returning to the topic of the animals.
Yes.
Example,
yes, Gabby, let's do.
In the local town of my grandmother, there is a program from the government for firefly fighting. It's supposed to be to fight against the trafficking of natural resources, principally like wood. They go to the forest.
Yep.
and also for stopping what we call what you call that is gas trafficking. But the problem is
Gas
that
trafficking.
yeah, they like accept and they like make people like local people to study about like the like biologically how fireflies, the necessities, how to get treated correctly. But the bad part about this is that it gets like they forgot about it when it's not the seasons of the fireflies, that it's only from like June to
Oh, that makes
July,
sense.
August.
Mhm.
So the trafficking of oil continues, and that's kind of like the bad part. But my question is, in the examples that you mentioned, I can just see that all of them are like kind of like permanent. The animals don't migrate like a lot. Like, for example, we have like monarch butterflies, fireflies, etc. So in those cases, what would be your recommendations for like partnerships or something for to keep those areas protected when it's not the
Season. Yeah. What a wonderful question. So I didn't mention migratory animal tourism. Well, that's a good migratory animal tourism. We need to write a paper on that. Okay. But we have it. A colleague from Canada came to the area where my university is to study firefly tourism. And that happened to be in a protected mountain, in a protected area. I don't know. He does a lot of work on insect tourism, and certainly not all insects migrate, but it's a smaller area. But what a fascinating question. I think right off the top of my head, it seems like there would need to be some educational efforts in the off season that would not necessarily say, now remember, not like chastising, but just what am I trying to say? Reminding the local stakeholders of the benefits that come from tourism, and that if the tourists are going to stop coming, if the resource isn't there. Now, in that, to make it not sound like, now remember, it could be a discussion of what do the tourists do that you don't like? What can we do to make this better for the community? I mean, it could be discussions like that would remind the local population of that the tourists are coming back. So how can we make it better for the community? How can we leverage? How can we take advantage of the tourists better? Can we ask for more donations towards firefly conservation? I'm totally making this up right now. But that would be, if I were presented with that problem and I had to make a decision, I think I would just have more community discussions in the off season about how to make this type of tourism better for the community, and that would remind them of it. And you had a question?
Hi.
Hi.
First, thanks for showing about the overview about the tourists. Because in Mexico, I think, it's about the debate about the impact negative. Negative impact is more huge, but positive. Because the ideas about the government through the public. So it's more that the community, it's nor nor no general turismo única. It's about the local development, about local. So if this permanent, it's interesting for the students in Mexico to compare about the comparative, the some case, success.
Yeah, thank you. I noticed that when Jafet was talking about the program was coming from the government, you were nodding your head. How could, so governments are always going to suggest programs, right?
Yes.
That's not going to change. So what do you think we can do to be better prepared for that when it's a program that we don't want, or we want it but maybe in a different shape? How? I'm asking you. Within local Mexican culture, because I can't say what would work. And so how do you think it could work?
I think it depends on the community, in every community. I don't think like there's a general answer to that.
Right.
But I'm thinking in several magical towns, for example, that they have been named after the program. They receive money in order to, manage all the facades and improve like tourist facilities. But there are some cases where people actually don't want to be part of this program. I was reading about Cisal. That's a town in Yucatan.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the other town, Comonfort in Guanajuato. Mm-hmm. Comonfort's story is very particular because Comonfort was an industrial town. Uh-huh. The industry is not there anymore because the industry moved to another part of Mexico. Mm-hmm. So they actually ran out of labor, of jobs. So the government decided, like, okay, well, we have Comonfort and there's no industrial activity there anymore. Let's impose tourism. So Comonfort is now a magical town, and people really don't know what to do with tourism because they weren't prepared for tourism for this tertiary activity now. And it's funny because while I was reading about Comonfort, it's like they are actually trying to promote tourism with the industrial parks there.
Yeah, that's great.
But it doesn't fit what the program is looking.
Oh.
So they're actually planning to, as I told you, start tourism with the industries.
Yeah.
But the government is not giving them the money, the capital, because it's not within within what the program is actually proposing to do, because this is not rural tourism, it's not about handicrafts, it's not about like a particular heritage element. So you can do tourism in that way, but not inside this program.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this is this kind of contradiction that sometimes happen in some rural communities or small communities that they want to develop tourism.
Yeah, I mean that is a problem. I mean that is completely counter than what we've been talking about. What type of tourism does the government want them to?
In pueblos mágicos, in magical towns, it's like
in that particular industrial area.
No, the communities they want to promote industrial tourism.
Right, which is great.
But they are part of this program, Pueblos Mágicos. So the government wants them to move towards, I don't know, handicrafts or rural activities or something about heritage, traditions, but they don't have any.
Hey. Well, even when you started the story and you were saying that the government, decided that, we're going to impose tourism, I was like, that's not going to work.
It's not working.
Yeah, that's not going to work. Not only is it not going to work for the community members, they're going to be very frustrated and angry, as they should be. The visitors are going to have a bad time. The visitors aren't going to feel any authenticity. As a tourist, you don't want to interact with an angry, frustrated community member. And so it's just not going to go well for anyone. Yeah. Well,
Yeah, that's a good case actually to study.
Yeah, it is. It is. Is there a certain part of the Mexican government? Is it a Ministry of Tourism or okay? Yes, interesting.
Also, the thing here is that many pueblos mágicos are named as pueblos mágicos because someone from that place or because someone important suddenly he proposed, my
sure.
town should be pueblo mágico.
Should be this, yes.
So I think the first question that when they want to introduce tourism in that places is asking them, do you want to promote tourism here? Because maybe the local people are not interested in that.
So that is a great segue, thank you, to the Uplift program. We received funding. When I say we, I mean like my university, I received funding, and my partner Simon received funding for a 3-year program in rural areas in North Carolina to do tourism. And step one, and so in the process of us, we wrote up what we were going to do. Okay, I mean you have to like say, this is what we want to do, give us money. Great. So we got the money, and which makes it sound a lot easier than it was. It took like 1.5 years of like networking and doing this. So, but now we know we have the money. When we wrote up the program, we had to name particular places that we'd like to work in. So we named places that the tourism expenditures went down from the year 2021 to 2020 to 21. Just name towns, and they're in. I mean, we had some strategy. They're very poor areas, very, very poor areas, and not a lot of tourism going on. So we picked the areas that kind of needed the most support. But now that the program is officially kicked off, it was my job to go back with every single tourism director and say, hi, we have this money and we have some ideas and we'd like to work with you. Here's what we're thinking, but what do you think? And like starting that with the one person. Now that tourism director might get paid nothing a year and have, it's like half their job to do this. That tourism director has a board of directors. And so now then the next step is like, hi, we've got some money and this is what we talked, so but it's and I say we do not want to go anywhere that we're not welcome. We don't want to go anywhere where there's not consent. We don't want to go anywhere where you're into it because you're a tourism director, but the people aren't into it. And so we're going to feel our way like for the first 6 months, and we're going to go, once we have their consent, we'll plan public meetings, and we're going to ease our way in. And at every step of the way, we might go, we're not feeling like this is what the community wants. And I guess that was a long story, but it we think we're doing it the right way, and I'm sure we're going to mess up, and I've already messed up. I've already made many mistakes, and my rural counterparts were like, you can't have a meeting at that time of day because people are working. I'm like, oh yeah. So it has to be that trust. It has to be there. They have to be able to say, Carol, you're being kind of dumb right now. Let me tell you, what's going to work in our community. And I have to say, thank you for the reality check. You're absolutely right. What is going to work best? And so I haven't worked in rural tourism for like all 30 years. I started that way, and then I took a little break and got my research game going, and now I'm going back. And so I've forgotten some things, and that trust is critical, absolutely critical. They have to know that I have the best intentions, and I have to know that they've got my back and we're going to work together.
Good. Yeah, good. I don't know. ¿Alguna otra pregunta? Any other question? I have one last question before we take you to the bullfight today, as we told you. I'm kidding. What do you think about creative tourism when it is implemented in these rural areas for trying to lift the tourism activity there and the engagement with local population and tourists? Does it work, or it doesn't work, or is also something with ups and downs?
I think what my answer is going to be. I think it's great if the local community wants it. I think if there's buy-in and that's really what they want, then yes, I think it can be very effective. But I think not just creative tourism, but any type of tourism, as long as we follow those principles, then I think it's got a better chance of working. I'm not saying it's gonna work. It'll definitely be successful, but it's got the better chance.
Okay.
Why do you ask about creative tourism?
Because there's someone here interested in creative tourism and he's not speaking.
Okay.
Yeah,
I see.
He didn't ask anything about it. Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Yeah,
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
So, no more questions? Perla.
I tried. I'm not sure about my pronunciation and my very bad English, but I tried.
Beautiful.
Well, in these cases of the presentation, you mentioned some problematics, like pollution or something like that.
Yeah.
But well, I think what other problematics, social problematics, have this story?
Wonderful.
Because, for example, in Mexico, the tourists have a lot of problematics because, in general, the tourists wants things very specific. For example, drugs, or for example, beers, or puffs, or I don't know, something like that.
Sure.
And the local persons maybe doesn't want this.
Sure.
With this, well, in Puebla, Zacapaxla, for example, have a tourist, but maybe with the traffic of animals, and maybe with the traffic of, I don't remember what's the word for fossils.
Yes, artifacts.
Something like that. And well, in Pueblos Mágicos, like a narco traffic.
Yeah.
I don't know. In these cases, I don't know what I say. Pasa.
Does it
happen?
Yes.
It happens.
Yes. I have a lot to say. Thank you for that. And first of all, thank you all for speaking in English to me. I don't speak Spanish. I can understand a little bit, and so please don't apologize, because I'm the one who is apologetic and embarrassed because I can't speak your language. Let's just say that. Let's start there. So thank you. Yeah, and you made it interesting. Before I address your comment / question, you made an interesting observation that if you're trafficking wildlife, the routes that you use to take this illegal, object, whether it's a human trafficking, wildlife trafficking, artifact trafficking, guns trafficking, and drug trafficking, they can be the same routes through. So that you just made a very interesting observation there, and I wanted to call attention to that. Drugs, also very interesting. In my sustainable tourism class, I talk about how a lot of times tourists think about destinations as, ooh, there's that crime there, or ooh, there's that prostitution there, or ooh, there are a lot of sexually transmitted diseases there. Well, it's the tourists bringing that in, and what's a shame is sometimes the destination gets blamed for it, right? It's the tourist creating the demand. And I'm glad to hear you say that sometimes communities are like, we don't want to rise to meet your demand. That's wonderful. We don't want to supply that demand. But then sometimes it does, the market does rise to meet that demand, but the fallout, the social impact falls out on the community, because people are like, ooh, that's that drug-ridden area. That's that area that's got all that crime. So yes, there are a lot of social impacts that you mentioned. Another social impact that we didn't talk about is Flores is now becoming gentrified. And gentrification is talked about in a negative way, typically, which I'm not against that. Gentrification is also development. It's economic development, and it's bringing in things that could improve the community's quality of life. But it also certainly brings in things that diminish the community's quality of life, especially if the community can't afford to live there anymore. And so that is starting to happen in Flores. I don't think we can say, oh, that's because of Arcus. I think that's more because of Tikal. But if Arcus is part of the tourism product mix, their hands aren't completely clean. So I don't know if you wanted me to talk more about. Do you want me to talk more about social negative impacts?
Well, actually, I think you have the answer
Okay.
for my question because, well, I think these cases are very different, different of here.
Okay.
And maybe, well, I'm geographer. I want other kind of tourists
Yes.
here
Yes.
because it's impossible try to think about end the tourist because some places are poor,
Yeah.
but very poor. Like my study case in Westphalen is with people Nahua and Totonaca,
Okay.
and maybe in this place it's impossible to try to think without tourists because the government
Impose.
is political, and the Nahuas and Totonacas fight with that, but really, well, it's impossible because they doesn't have the apoyo,
Support.
support, and well, I don't know. I think it's very difficult, and well, if the tourist is here, try to do the other forms.
Right.
I think that, and I thank you for your answer.
Oh, so I did answer that?
Yeah.
Oh, I did? Okay.
The last question.
I have a couple additional thoughts. So it sounds like the government wants tourists. Tourists are in the study area that you're doing. And it's hard. It's hard if the tourists are already there to change the trajectory. That's really hard. Rather than if it's there's not a lot going on yet, and you can sort of craft it from the beginning or from the early stages. So am I correct that tourist is already happening in your study area, and you'd like to see it change to a different type of tourism? Yeah, that's difficult. I wonder, do a lot of people share your vision?
I don't understand very well the question.
Do you the first one?
Well, do a lot of people share that vision?
Hay mucha gente que comparte tu visión.
Well, I think not a lot because, well, in general, the people want to happen like now. But I think some people maybe.
Yeah. So they're used to it being the way it is, and they're just going along with it.
Es que la gente está de acuerdo con eso, o sea, simplemente se lleva bien con el turismo, o sea, con la postura.
Some of the people, yeah, but it's all the time fight because some people don't want.
That's hard.
Yeah, all the time.
It's hard.
Well, I think in Mexico it's very common.
Sure. So, in an ideal situation, do you know ideal?
¿Una situación ideal?
No. Oh, well, so in an ideal situation, the people who want change could band together, right? And it would be cool if there were some research that could be shown that tourists actually want to do these other things, and that there's a viable market to do other types of tourism, like the economic impact of craft. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's difficult in this case because the government doesn't have in these places the locals have a language very specific, and maybe, for example, me, I try to understand the people,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't speak the language. And I think it's a very big problem.
Oh, wow.
Because maybe the government, how can I say, se aprovecha
Takes advantage of.
Yeah.
Of this situation.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's a big problem.
It is a big problem. I'm starting to see a lot of the dynamics.
Yeah, Quetzalan, what Perla is, the community Perla is working with, they don't speak Spanish as a first language. They speak Nahuatl, and they have this they have an indigenous identity really, really, really strong.
Right.
So that's what for example, the magical towns documents are not translated to Nahuatl, for example. They are just in Spanish, and when people actually go there, they don't know how to do it. So it's the government who is taking the direction.
Right.
So, yeah.
Really interesting.
And maybe these stories, it's the causante.
Sí. ¿Causante de qué?
Of the loss of the language. Because
it's causing those languages.
Se forzan.
They are forced to
speak Spanish.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And it's a really, really big problem because the tourist is not friendly with the language.
Right.
And I think they lost a lot of knowledge of university and cultural heritage and something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you for painting a picture of how difficult that situation is. As you have said, tourism really can cause a lot of damage to a community. And it sounds like a very difficult situation. If we were writing like a textbook, I could envision like a way out, right? An ideal. What is the Spanish word for ideal? Ideal. So like an idealistic, all right, way out, but it would be very, very difficult, right? There is a path, but it's so hard to get all the players aligned, and you would need money and power, and it would take all these things to line up. And I'm sorry that it's like that. Yeah. And it would, in this case, I think it would take, certainly a lot of local action and activity, but I think one of the benefits of having an outside influence is it can get the attention of the government. It can get the attention for some reason. People who come from the outside, there's that joke, it's like a consultant is someone from the outside carrying a briefcase. I mean, it's like, oh, they must know what they're talking about. And so if there were someone with finances that could get the attention of the government to listen, that no, it's actually this local indigenous culture that we're interested in developing, and we want to work with the local stakeholders, then maybe those voices could drown out with enough local support. Those voices could drown out the imposing voices of the government. Does that make sense? Am I making sense? Okay. Thank you.
Álvaro, ¿te das preguntas?
Well, I want to tell you that Tourism Mexico was produces as a strategy in order to get money from the tourists,
Sure.
but especially from the foreigners.
Yes.
So the politics are related with the idea that, that was the beginning. After that, tourism has growing and growing and growing, and now we are very dependent on the tourism.
Yeah.
So the problem is that the government feels that we must encourage the tourism in all places. So I think nowadays the problem is that people people in general do not talk in their communities if what kind of tourism they want. It's like an imposition.
Right.
So I think that is one of the main problems.
Yeah.
So I think nowadays government is trying, with the new federal government, they are trying to change that vision. So, but actually it's very new, like new vision, probably sustainable tourism, but very anthropocentric perspective.
Sure. That's another battle to fight. Yeah. Sure.
But I think, in my point of view, that is probably one of the main problems. The imposition of tourism, and people are not.
And that's part of the culture. That's just an inherent part of the culture now that tourism comes from the outside. Yeah, that's too bad. That is really. And you don't even think, and you alluded to this, that you don't even think about it being any other way because you're just so used to it being like that.
Exactly.
And it's very different from the examples that you were talking about in USA.
Well, I mean, in USA,
Uganda,
those. Oh, well, believe me, and I mean, this was a short. I could only tell you a little bit about Uganda and a little bit about, but there are the Guatemalan example was probably also very, very positive, but the one in Norway and in Uganda, there are problems. I mean, there certainly. One solution is all of you in this room go work for the Ministry of Tourism. That is the solution.
Yes.
In my class, in my tourism class, we do this grid exercise, and my students just roll their eyes when I talk about the grid. But each column represents the major categories of impacts that tourism has on a community. And you've got economic, sociocultural, and environmental. And then you've got positive impacts and negative impacts. And that's where I come up with, we want to maximize these and minimize these. And in each of these blocks, there can be like 10 very specific impacts. So once you all are in your regional and national positions in tourism and you're developing tourism, don't forget the grid. Okay, use that as a model, as well as the community's capitals framework. Okay, all right, cool.
Okay, Carol, thank you very much for your first presentation in Mexico. Well, in the Institute of Social Sciences.
Thank you.
Let's hope there's a second.
Oh, and a third.
And a third.
Yeah. Why are we stopping at 2? Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay.
Thank you all so much for being so engaging and for speaking to me in English and for listening in English. Thank you so much for being here. It was really lovely to see you all and talk with you.
Y bueno. Pues muchísimas gracias por haber venido, sí, por las preguntas. Espero que les haya gustado la participación de Carol. Allá en casa, que están viendo de manera virtual, también muchísimas gracias por conectarse. Y pues les esperamos en una siguiente conferencia más adelante. Que tengan buen día. Javier, muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you. There were a lot of engagement.
Yes. Yes. And it's really nice, also interesting to see the students actually speaking in English, because sometimes with Albert, we're like, let's have like a lecture in English with the students. Like, no, they're not going to understand. Yes, they can understand.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Sí. Y de hecho yo le dije, vamos a viajar por el